Okay. Uh, Hi, Joe Wenberg, Bluebird Semaphore. And I'm going to do a video. I haven't done one for a while. I know I said I'd be working on Europe, and I have done some look into that. I mean, that's a gigantic subject, so, usually it gets broken down into many smaller subjects, smaller parts. But I did go back and start at the beginning and look at the folks who were up and coming when there was still glaciers covering a good deal of Europe, and then as they melted back, and these Stone Age hunters would push to the receding edges of the glaciers because they were following the large game. So I did look into that, but there's just no way I can stick to a single subject. I get distracted, and my distraction this time, uh, basically, some of the distractions seem worthy for me to talk about, and I want to do that. I want to talk about Emily Dickinson, who, as you may or may not know, is the preeminent poet and literary person of America in the mid 19th century and a little beyond as you go towards the latter part of the 19th century. So she was this woman living most of her life in Amherst, Massachusetts. And the reason why she lived most of her life there is because her father and her grandfather were instrumental in founding Amherst College. And as such, she grew up with the more intellectual people in the area at the time. Although there, it seems to me, reading her biography, the life of the people was in no way made to seem strange by those folks because they were living a fairly intellectual life as opposed to other people in the town who maybe were tradesmen or non intellectual workers, whatever you want to call them. Uh, I would have to say that she did have advantages to allow her to flourish, although they had a lot of the family, the Dickinson family, did have a lot of unpleasant trees in their life, and just without saying anything, I mean, the deal with those people's health in those days, tuberculosis would impact seemingly 50% of the people. Everybody was coughing and being violently stricken by tuberculosis. And it was all around in her family, lots of deaths. She managed to survive though, and she was not a hardy physical specimen. She was a slight, slender woman, but she had the push and she had the courage necessary to do great things, and she did. She had a powerful individualistic mind, and be that as it may, or come hell or high water, she was going to believe what she believed, and she was going to act on her beliefs. Just a remarkable person. I'm not finished with reading about her life yet, but I can tell she's a very remarkable person. And years ago, the little bit that I did know about her, I pretty much had her all wrong because, according to what I had read, she led a very secluded life and as if she never came out of our house, which is totally not true. She is secluded, never married, this and that. Some of that maybe applies, but she did get out of her house and she did do things. And one of the things, religion was very big with the people there, the Calvinists, or Calvin, whatever they are, and everybody was brother this and sister that, and they were all looking to be saved. You didn't have that concept of like with the Roman Catholic Church where you have original sin and then baptism gets rid of it. No, you had to be saved. And by that, it meant that you would go to church, you would go to prayer meetings, you would do all these things, and then one day the floodgates would open wide and you would feel the power of the Lord come into you and you would claim that you were saved. Now that was a big deal because once you could claim you were saved, you had every right to go to heaven. And why was that a big deal? Because, well, now you could see all the people who died before you who was also saved because they're up there waiting for you. And people coming after you. If they're saved, you're going to see them too. So it's very important. As far as I could tell, Dickinson was not saved. She never sought whatever they call it. I think they said redemption. She didn't. She had too much controversy going on in her intellectual life to put her well-being in the hands of some other entity. That just wasn't going to happen for somebody with such a strong mind as Emily Dickinson. So, and there's a lot to be said about her and Amherst and the Norcross family, which is her mother's family. A lot to be said about these people. And it's one of the benefits of reading biographies, because if the guy's doing his job or the gal is doing her job, you should get a lot of background that's teaching you not so much about the person in the biography, but about the social milieu that they lived in. Okay? So you get that out of reading Emily Dickinson's biography. By the way, the book, if I get it right, that I'm reading, and there's many a biography on Emily Dickinson, but the title is My Wars Were Laid in Books. That's the title, or something near that. And it's one of these books that I think many people might not like the way it's written. But I do. It's, they're just keeps on pouring on as if it was a fire hose of all this information coming from the writer. And it just keeps coming and coming. And a lot of it is similar, but with uniqueness. So I liked it, and I'm liking it. And interestingly enough, at the same time I'm reading her, I came across a documentary on YouTube about Edna St. Vincent Millay, another female poet, very late 19th century and early 20th century, and beyond, probably up to the mid 20th century. Remarkable person, but very different than Emily Dickinson. The two are different, although I would say they probably resemble each other in physical stature. I think they were both slight, and I think they both had red hair. Edna St. Vincent Millay, though, she came out of Camden, Maine. Very interesting story there. And she became very famous and much sought after poet, or poetess, whatever you want to call it. But she, very different than Emily Dickinson. But it was good for me to be reading about the both women at the same time. And I was able to catch up with Churchill, at least up until the mid 1930s. And, you'd say Churchill, that's European history, that's English history. And at the same time, I'm getting information about World War II because another fella, I think his name is Colville, he wrote he wrote down a diary he kept while he was being secretary for the prime minister. What about 1938 or something like that? He was appointed to be the secretary to whoever was residing in 10 Downing, meaning the prime minister. So the book starts there, and I am getting a lot of background information about how the British were conducting the British lifestyle during the early days of World War II, and this will continue until the end of World War II. But the reason I bring it up because I'm getting, I believe, quite a different look at British society than I've gotten before. This guy seems to be the guy who knew everybody, and he's constantly, because he's writing this in his diary, so he's constantly mentioning this person and that person and the other person. And of course, they're all Lord this, Sir that, Dutch Duke this, Duchess that. They're all the affluent upper classes. That's it. There's nothing else that matters in England in those days. They were running their country, and as far as they could tell, they were running the rest of the world. And it's to this guy, the way he's writing in his diary, this is all perfectly normal, perfectly natural. This is the way the world is supposed to be. We're the elite, we're running it, so shut up, sit down, get your shovel and dig, and get your broom and sweep. It's just so arrogant, and their lives. Now, he was now a somewhat important official, and England was stepping into this disastrous war, and his days are spent, chit-chatting with other members of Parliament and the cabinet. They're all chit-chatting. They go to lunch, they have a wonderful breakfast, they go to lunch, they chit-chat, then they come out and maybe they play some card games, then they go to dinner again, and then they go to the opera, and this life is just a whirlwind of pleasure for these people. In the meantime, they're all agreeing, we got another 100,000 troops, we'll get them out, get them sent out, we get them out, listen, we do this now, there won't be so many dead, there'll be lots less dead. We do this now, and then another 100,000, another 100,000. That's all they could do. Sit around, and they had no idea that what they were doing was detestable. Not that somebody had to step on the Germans, no doubt about that. But the way the British were living their life, the upper crust during the war is just hideous. Now, of course, what the pablum they feed the rest of the world is that, wow, the princesses living in Buckingham Palace, the daughters of the king and the queen, well, they were serving, did work. I mean, they were hunkering down and doing this. They weren't up above it all. That's pablum for the rest of us to believe that the upper crust was pulling their load, you know? I mean, this book by, I believe his name is Colville, I think it's The Fringe of Power. I mean, that was just not the case. If you read this book, and if you accept what he's being said in the book, it's just not the case that the upper crust was put out by the war. They weren't. They continued to live just as if there was no war. I mean, the most important thing on their minds always was, what are we going to do when this is over? And how are we going to make sure we still have all our money and all our property? That's what was on their mind. Not the 750,000 British men who would die in that war. So that was mine. That opened my mind a bit, and in the meantime, I grabbed a hold of a book on the Korean War. I think it's called something about high tide in Incheon, Inchon. The Korean War came about real fast. You know, the rest of the world really didn't expect to have a war so quickly after World War II. So people were caught off guard, including the Americans. But the one person who wasn't caught off guard was, of course, General MacArthur. And he acted a lot on his own. He didn't wait so much for orders. The orders came, but he got the balls rolling. As soon as he knew that Korea was going to be a problem, he got the ball rolling. He decided on an invasion in Incheon. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, Inchon. It's a port on the west coast of Korea, a little above Seoul. And he picked that because it was considered very unlikely. It had really bad physical characteristics for an amphibious assault, which is what he would have to do. The communist North Koreans had already invaded and taken Seoul. The defenders of South Korea had fought them off, and there was now a perimeter around Busan, which was the east coast of Korea, pretty much at the same latitude as Incheon. You could almost draw a line. So MacArthur says, okay, I'm going to come in from Incheon, I'm going to go around Seoul, and I'll attack the North Koreans from the north, which they had no anticipation of that happening. So, and I'm still looking into that, but the fact of the matter is that most everybody was a little slow to the jump on Korea, except for MacArthur. And he did get a lot of the really right people in line to work this campaign. And one of the things I'm finding as I read about this now is that unlike many other wars fought in the 20th century, where the generals and the admirals' names become household items, it seems not so for Korea. You know, the generals and the admirals, their names are not as well known. And I think that's by design. And I think that's because the president at the time, Truman, was against this war. He didn't want it, but he knew the gig was up. He's going to have to do something. He couldn't continue to be this pacifist. He was going to have to do something, or the Far East was going to fall. He knew it, so he grudgingly went along with MacArthur and the chiefs of staff. Even the chiefs of staff were not really 100% behind this, but Truman definitely wasn't. So Truman, I'm sure, made sure that the press didn't give a lot of glory to the boys who were fighting, and not only the boys, but the commanders, the admirals, the generals, the guys in the trenches, all of that. They didn't want this to become a political victory for militarism. They just didn't. They didn't. Now, in the long run, there was a stalemate, as you know, with Korea, stalemate. And and then after that, we had started to get a reduction in warfare throughout the globe. We had the Vietnam War, we had Serbia, we had turmoil in Africa like you couldn't believe. But still in all, it's almost 70 years since the end of World War II, and we haven't had another global conflict like that. So one could start to maybe consider that the United Nations has been useful in preventing that type of disaster. Again, you could start to think in those ways. However, you could never trust for sure, because we don't know what the politicians of the world are doing. We don't know what the leaders of the world are doing. We don't know. We never will know. That's the bottom line. They go about do whatever they want to do, and they say it's absolutely necessary that they keep the rest of us in the dark. And the Colville book, like I said, the fringes of power. You'll see it. I mean, everything he talks about is doing something on the stealth, doing it on the QT. Just the in crowd knowing about this. I almost don't want to read the book, but I'm going to read it. Emily Dickinson, Edna St. Vincent Millay. I finally found out how she got to St. Vincent. Her father got very sick on a voyage, a sea voyage back to Manhattan, and they put him in a hospital, and the hospital was St. Vincent's. And so they named the girl born shortly thereafter as Edna St. Vincent Millay. Just an aside there. But I'm also clearing up the facts in the Gordon, also referred to as Chinese Gordon, who was executed in Khartoum by the Midi, and how Lord Kitchener came to his aid. Now, I always had those two a little bit out of sync time-wise. I didn't know who came first, Kitchener or Gordon, or they were simultaneous. The fact is, Kitchener was much younger than Gordon, but he rose up the ranks pretty fast, and when it came time to needing somebody to go rescue Gordon, Kitchener was assigned the task. Unfortunately, due to all the, people wanting to put their ideas first and their ways of doing things first, they didn't get to Gordon in time. So he died. What I did come across is, and if you've been listening to or actually reading any of my books, probably more in the second one, which really isn't public yet, finished but not public. I talk very denigrating about an Admiral David Beatty, the fleet admiral in Jutland, the English fleet admiral. He's big time, you know. But I assigned a lot of his big time to his connections and not to his abilities as an admiral. Now, and if you ever get to read the book, I explain why I come up with that. But what I thought was interesting, and I had heard it mentioned in some of my readings, that Beatty was somehow involved with Egypt at the time of Gordon being I want to use the right word here, being in a terrible mess up there in Khartoum. He was in a real mess. Nobody was coming to his aid. And he was the darling of the British. He was their darling, Chinese Gordon. I think he saved people in Peking, the Boxer Rebellion. I'm thinking maybe it was that, it was something else, but he was very, very much the British darling. So for him to not get the support he needed tells you an awful lot about how split apart they all were. All the prime ministers, they were just terrible, you know, just terrible. And their inability to be prompt, to be resolute, just terrible. And the reason why I'm going on and on is because, lo and behold, one of the leaders of the expedition, one of the members, I won't say leaders, of the expedition that was going up the Nile to save Gordon was David Beatty, who was probably just maybe a lieutenant in the British Navy at the time, or a captain, who knows, but he certainly wasn't the fleet admiral or anything like that. So then, to wrap all of this up, it's that there's just so much in world history. I don't know how anybody could avoid it. I mean, it's just so much. And when you think you're getting a little history by going to the movies, it's probably done more damage to the way people think than good. You know, because you get such I want to almost say you get the wrong story. You get the wrong idea when you see these so-called historical movies. You get the wrong idea. You're better off not having any idea. So let's wrap it up for today. This is way too long already. But I'm going to keep doing these world history things because to me there's probably nothing more important in the world than knowing how we got into the mess we're in. And I don't make it out like I'm all negative and all of that stuff. If you could truly look out and not see that we're in a big, big mess, then I don't know what you're looking at. And I don't know what prepared you to look at anything. Because to my mind, you were never given the right stuff. So bye-bye for now. If you get a chance, look into the works of Emily Dickinson and Edna St. Vincent Millay, who, by the way, got the Robert Frost Poetry Medal. She also won, Edna St. Vincent Millay also won a Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. A lot of that stuff was the first of it, that like a woman got, you know. But she was quite the deal. All right, I gotta go now. Bye-bye. Have a nice day. See you around the campus.